Member for Surrey Newton.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It is always an honor and a privilege to stand here and speak on issues that affect so many people out there. And I say that this is a privilege. Very few of us get to be here and talk about issues that affect so many people that we represent, all of us collectively. Today we are talking about Bill 35, officially called the Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 2015. And Mr. Speaker, I must say that I'm saddened, I'm disappointed, and I'm angry that we are making these changes after 4 deaths and over 40 people seriously injured in 2 mill explosions, one at Burns Lake, another one at Lakeland. And I never understand why is it that it always takes a tragedy for people in authority to make changes. You could stand here and speak until you're blue in the face, but people in authority don't pay attention because they don't think anything's going to happen. This case, these 2 explosions, there were warnings, there were signs brought on by the workers, and the management knew. There were explosions before the big explosion, and what happened? Nothing happened, and no changes were made. WCB knew, but again, they failed to act, which is contrary to their mandate. There's a contrary to their goals as they lay out on their website even today. And I'll get into that, Mr. Speaker, in a minute. But real issue here is after those 4 families losing their loved ones, Robert Lugie, Carl Charlie, Glenn Roach, and Alan Little, that here we are sitting making changes that came out of the inquest of those deaths. I'm glad that we are doing this, Mr. Speaker, and that's fine. But can you imagine families sitting through and listening to all of this? It will not return their loved ones. The people that have left permanent scars, mentally and physically, of all those people who were injured in those explosions, it's not going to help them bring any closure, Mr. Speaker. But I think it still is good that we are making changes for the future. But if we are really serious about protecting health and safety of working people, then we must look at overall the mandate of the WorkSafe BC and actually how are they complying with that mandate. And let me, Mr. Speaker, give you what their mandate is. They say that the origin and fundamental value of workers' compensation rests on the principle of mutual protection arising from the historic compromise, and I'll speak about that in a minute, in which workers relinquished their right to sue their employer and employer agreed to fund a no-fault insurance system. British Columbia Workers' Compensation Act enshrined the historic compromise and create WorkSafe BC. WorkSafe BC is an independent agency governed by Board of Directors, appointed by government. The mandate of WorkSafe BC in concert with workers and employers is to promote the prevention of workplace injury, illness, and disease. That's their mandate. Did they actually succeed in that mandate? Were they actually fulfilling that mandate when those 2 explosions took place? and many other people who have died and killed and injured at workplaces. In addition to those two explosions, they failed. They failed, Mr. Speaker. And we as legislators have responsibility to those workers who go to work in the morning, that they go home in the same shape that they came in. That's our responsibility through WorkSafe BC. And it's a government and a minister's responsibility that that mandate is carried through. But seems to me it's all words, empty words. They failed. They failed when they were told that the explosion are occurring. They failed to go and intervene so that explosion does not occur. They, in fact, Mr. Speaker, knew years ahead when they brought in some consultant from the United States who gave them a presentation, the dangers of sawdust in sawmills. But they sat on it, Mr. Speaker, did nothing. So they failed on their first mandate to the prevention of workplace injuries, illness, and disease. And then, Mr. Speaker, every day, I'm sure every member of this House get all those workers who are injured at workplace. They come to your offices, and the frustration that they go through dealing with their injuries with the WorkSafe BC. These are some of the most difficult cases that I come across. Some of the people that you sit there and you feel like crying with them because they are so frustrated. Their families are frustrated how they are treated by WorkSafe BC, Mr. Speaker. So they are failing. They're failing on their second part of their mandate, which is to rehabilitate those who are injured and provide timely return to work, Mr. Speaker. All they do is somehow that the historic compromise is lost. All they care, ever since this Liberal government came to power in 2001, is that somehow run WorkSafe BC on a business model. Now, businesses, as we all know, businesses are there to make profit and more profit and have better return for their shareholders. But the WorkSafe BC, through that historic compromise, Mr. Speaker, was to provide relief to the employer so that workers will not sue them when they are injured at workplace and potentially bankrupt them if there's a decision by the court, or seriously hurt their existence, Mr. Speaker. That's the protection that the employer got. So they continue to have that protection. There's no problem there on their side. But the workers on the other side, when they relinquish their right to sue their employer, they were given a promise that they will be looked after in the event that they are injured at workplace. First thing what this government did, they reduced their benefits, Mr. Speaker. And that's their third part of the mandate. The first part, the prevention, they failed miserably. Second part, to rehab those who are injured to provide them timely back to work. They fail their workers on daily basis out there, Mr. Speaker. And then the other mandate is to provide fair compensation to replace workers' loss of wages while recovering from injury, Mr. Speaker. This is the clicker. They fail on the first two, and this third one, what did this government do? You will see the minister after minister and the member after member of the Liberal side of the government will stand up and how they care about the health and safety of the working people. Mr. Speaker, first thing they did when they changed the WorkSafe or the act to bring the WorkSafe BC, Mr. Speaker, and they changed the name and they changed the benefits. It used to be 75% of their gross pay. If you're injured, you will get 75% of their gross pay, because that's roughly what your take-home pay is after the taxes. So you are almost made whole, and up to a maximum. It's not that if you're making so much money that you will continue to get their 75, but there was a limit, there was a cap. Mr. Speaker, this government, they came in, they said 90% of their take-home pay. How is that providing them fair compensation, Mr. Speaker? That is one of their mandates. They're failing on that side as well, Mr. Speaker. Then there's another one, ensure sound financial management for a viable workers' compensation system. I think all of the energy and mandate is spent on the last one. This is where they spend most of their time, most of their resources, ensure sound financial management for viable workers' compensation system. Again, like I said, they turn it into a business. They treat it as a business. And who suffers as a result of that? The workers, Mr. Speaker. And workers, their health and safety is not, their health and safety is not protected at a workplace. They are not provided proper rehabilitation if they're injured, Mr. Speaker. They're not provided fair compensation, Mr. Speaker. And they're the one who pay the price for that historic compromise, Mr. Speaker. So they are not getting their part of the bargain. They're not being, the government side or the worker compensation side is not living up to the part of the agreement that they made with the workers, Mr. Speaker. So that's the problem. And I'll get into all of that, Mr. Speaker, and more in details. I just want to go back how I personally felt all those changes, Mr. Speaker. I was, in my real work life, I worked in a sawmill. Eburn Sawmill is no longer there, Mr. Speaker. I served on a safety committee. I served on a plant committee. It was mostly in 1980s. And Mr. Speaker, it was a frustration after frustration even at that time. The old social credit government, they all were also working on a business model, more to worry about the employer side, not to look after the workers and their health and safety at workplace, Mr. Speaker. And then, Mr. Speaker, I represented workers in logging side, manufacturing side, Mr. Speaker, and as a result, I know, Mr. Speaker, what goes on and the frustration that the safety committees go through. And as good as this is to make changes to the WorkSafe BC and this act, Mr. Speaker, but I want everyone to understand. They talk about workers and workers' health and safety committees. You know what? 80% of the workplaces don't have the health and safety committees. 80% plus. You know why? Because there's a limit. If you have so many workers, then you're required to have a health and safety committee. So none of this matters to 80% of the workplaces, Mr. Speaker. So there's no voice on behalf of the workers at those places. So where we have health and safety committees, Mr. Speaker, this government, through these type of legislations and through WCB, they tie their hands and they're not able to work the way they should be, the way they want to protect their fellow workers and their health and safety, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the issue here is we can put all those changes in place, and like I said, I'm so saddened that we have to do this after those 4 deaths. But Mr. Speaker, as tragic as it is for those families, and my heart goes out to them, and I say that even today, and I say that those families, my heart or sympathies are with them, always. But I think they need more than that from us. They need some real changes. When they ask for public inquiry, Mr. Speaker, this government again denied them that right, so that they could find out exactly what happened, who was in charge, who was at fault, who failed to protect their members of the family. This government had no interest in that. That just shows that they're not serious, Mr. Speaker. They're not serious about protecting workers' health and safety, because they're more worried about protecting the skin of the employer and those who are responsible who failed to protect these workers, Mr. Speaker. You know, the Minister of Labor, I know genuinely she tries, and I said this in this House before. But you know, the system that she works under, within, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get done. Otherwise, why would you say no to the public inquiry? And that's the question. The minister must ask herself why they said no to the public inquiry. When the Premier went and met with those families and those communities, said, I will be watching your back. You will have a full support. We will get to the bottom of it. Then why stop? Then why you did not fulfill that promise? That's the question of the minister I have. Why couldn't you stand up to the Premier and say, look, we need to go through the promise that you made to those families? It takes leadership. It takes, in a situation like this, it may take risks because you may not be the minister after you challenge the Premier. But that's the price sometimes you pay to bring real change. You will be known and you will be remembered if you were able to deliver on that, Mr. Speaker, for a long time. Not now. Not now. No, you're simply pulling the lines from the Premier. That's basically what's happening. How could a Premier of the province go to the families that I will provide you the full support, we'll get to the bottom of it, Mr. Speaker, then not to fulfill that? And there are clear evidences here that the coroner will not get to the bottom. There are clearly limitations what coroner can do compared to the public inquiry, Mr. Speaker, and I think that is a real disappointment. And Mr. Speaker, I think nothing's going to change until the attitudes are changed of the people in power. If they decide that we will take health and safety of the workers seriously, and we will bring changes so that those who are responsible for workers' health and safety, they failed, and due to their negligence, worker killed or seriously injured at a workplace, that they can be charged and they will go to jail. Until that happens, Mr. Speaker, it's not going to change anything. And that is a real sad story of the day. That is a real, I would say, a display of irresponsibility by this Liberal government towards the working people. Mr. Speaker, they had an opportunity. I presented a private member's bill in this House after those explosions. And I thought that the government will listen because it makes sense. Because the law is there. You know, in Ottawa, the criminal code was changed. Bill C-45 was brought in after the Westray mine explosion in 1992. And then C-45 was passed unanimously, I might say, in the Parliament of Canada to make it a criminal offense if someone whose responsibility is to protect health and safety of workers failed, that they could be charged, Mr. Speaker, under that section. And, Mr. Speaker, I may give you that. Bill C-45 and what actually it does. What happened, Mr. Speaker, under Bill C-45? It changed the criminal code, and Mr. Speaker, the section 217.1 was included in the criminal code, and this is what it says. Everyone who undertakes or has the authority to direct how another person does work or performs a task is under a legal duty to take reasonable steps to prevent bodily harm to that person or any other person arising from that work or task. Criminal negligence then is described under 219.1, everyone is criminally negligent who, A, is doing anything, or B, in omitting to do anything that it is his duty to do, shows wanton or reckless disregard for the lives or safety of other persons. That's the law. Since 2004, when this law was passed, Mr. Speaker, approximately over 1,000 workers killed every year in Canada. Over 1,000 workers. You would think that if there was a will and desire on the government side to implement and use and exercise the use of this criminal code, Mr. Speaker, that there will be one charge, there will be at least one conviction. Zero. None, Mr. Speaker. That just shows the willingness on the government side who failed to live up to the intent of this law and failed to enforce the law that emanated from Bill C-45, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and then we have just come back to BC. When this government came to power, they made changes to the WorkSafe BC. And Mr. Speaker, you will remember that in the forest industry, we had a record number of deaths in 1 year. I believe it was over 45. Highest ever in the history. Why? It wasn't that the forest industry become more dangerous that particular year or the year after. It was the way they brought changes to the WorkSafe BC and how they shifted responsibility of protecting health and safety of the workers from the employer down to the person himself. So the person at the bottom, who is a contractor, a single person contractor, is responsible for his and her health and safety, Mr. Speaker. And if that person who is getting work through contract from people higher up, from other contractors, if they complain, you know what would happen. They will not have that job anymore. As a result, that's a direct result, I would say, of the changes that were brought by this government, that we had so many deaths in the forest industry. So many deaths in the forest industry, Mr. Speaker. And you know what? I might give them credit. But you know, again, why, after having to allow 45 deaths in the forest industry, that then you're forced to make changes? You were warned ahead of time, don't make those changes. Don't make those changes. But then they brought some changes, Mr. Speaker, and guess what? The deaths in the forest industry were reduced in the following years. So there's a clear evidence, clear correlation of their policy and those deaths in the forest industry. And sometimes I wonder how we as legislators, especially, I feel responsible because they elected me to send me here to hold their feet to the fire to make sure they don't make those crazy laws that are not good for the health and safety of the working people. How could I not, stop them? But responsibility lies on the minister and the government because they are the one who could change. They're the one who bring policies, Mr. Speaker. So how do you go home and sleep? Because you were trying to bring a business model that resulted in so many deaths. You weren't thinking. You weren't thinking. You were simply listening to one side. That was to protect the employer who could make more money as they promised this government, because they are their backers, right? They are their big backers, so they do everything what they're told by their funders. And Mr. Speaker, the working people and their families end up paying for all of that. Mr. Speaker, the bill that I brought to this House, it was promoted by BC Federation of Labor, and it was clearly extension of C-45 and how we could actually implement in practice, Mr. Speaker, and the government wouldn't even look at it, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't even bring here for debate, Mr. Speaker, and that is a real shame. Mr. Speaker, the component of that bill were this. You tell me if that doesn't make any sense. And even McAtee, who was the commissioner appointed at the board, he recommended some of those changes that I recommended in this House, Mr. Speaker. Here, number one, we said, be it resolved that this House urge the government to pursue prosecution of corporate executives and directors responsible for workers' health and safety in case of negligence causing workplace death or injury or serious injury. Number one, dedicate Crown prosecutor to deal with workplace fatality and serious injuries. So this prosecutor will become an expert in reviewing these investigations against Section 217.1 of the Criminal Code and therefore more accurate determining the likelihood of conviction. Makes sense. And that's what is recommended actually by the board commissioner that was appointed by this government. And then number two, train police services on Section 217.1 to ensure that the police understand the law and how and know what to look for in workplace fatality and serious injury cases in order to collect the best evidence to support the Crown Council's decision making. That is also one of the recommendations that came out of the coroner's report, Mr. Speaker. You know, why wait? Why wait? You know what it takes. We brought it here to your attention that these changes are needed and they are helpful, Mr. Speaker, but the government won't go with it. Number three, make mandatory police investigation of all workplace fatalities and serious injuries, Mr. Speaker. Tell me, does it, I don't know, what is it that they don't understand on that side? If due to your negligence, if you're driving a car on the road and due to your negligence, you killed someone on the road, guess what happened? You get charged. You get charged criminally. You could go to jail, Mr. Speaker. So why is it if someone's negligence, a worker is killed at workplace, then nothing happens to that worker, that person, who have legal responsibility under the law to protect the health and safety of the worker that work under them. And if they fail to protect them, they're killed or they are injured seriously. Why something never happens to that person? Why are there two standards? Why worker's life is considered to be less valuable than somebody who's killed on the road? These are family members. These are our brothers and our sisters, brothers, Mr. Speaker, and these are our neighbors. These are not just the numbers. I hope that the government side will, consider it seriously because there are so many changes that are needed at the WorkSafe that the government will consider bringing changes to that. How do you prevent prevent injuries at workplaces? That's what we need, Mr. Speaker. All those people who are injured at workplaces, Mr. Speaker, and the pain and suffering that they go through every day, the stories that they bring to us into our offices. It is very, very troubling, Mr. Speaker, that this government does not listen or learn how to give them respect and dignity when they are injured at a workplace. How do you pay them fair compensation? How do you provide a real rehabilitation to go to work? Why you cut off their benefits, Mr. Speaker? Why do they have to fight tooth and nail with the WorkSafe BC in order to get what's theirs in the first place? It's not them that caused the injury, Mr. Speaker. It's somebody's negligence, especially. Then why those workers have to suffer because somebody else's fault and somebody else's negligence? And why that person isn't held accountable because of whose negligence that worker is injured at a workplace. Mr. Speaker, that's this government's responsibility. That's everyone's responsibility because these are the people who create wealth for this province. These are the people, Mr. Speaker, that pay taxes. They obey the law. These are the people, Mr. Speaker, that pay the bills to run this government, Mr. Speaker. These are the people, when they're injured, are not respected. Their dignity, Mr. Speaker, is questioned. Their honesty is questioned. And that's something this government has to learn. And we bring this to their attention time and again. Those workers bring this to their attention time and again, Mr. Speaker, only if the government will listen. Mr. Speaker, it's not good enough for government simply make some superficial changes and say that our work is done, and leave it up to the WorkSafe BC and somehow say that it's not our responsibility as minister, that those workers should be protected in the workplace, should be looked after when they are injured, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we need. Thank you very much.